class. Our class will be short today because we're starting late, but let's see how far we can go. I have a little outline here to help me. So we started looking at design, and then last week we looked at the universe basically. And for what we looked at, the arguments we looked at, the teleological argument and the anthropic principle. Remember the anthropic principle? We said that it seems like the universe is fine-tuned to support human life. That's basically what the anthropic principle is about. So, looking at the universe, we said that we have more reasons to think that the universe was created or designed, that the universe was designed, than to think that it just popped into existence out of nothing. We have philosophical reasons to believe that the universe began, right? And now we have scientific reasons to believe that the universe began. We also have scientific reasons to think that the way the universe is, from the way the universe is, it has evidence of design. Yeah, that's basically what we did last week, yeah? So I said that this week we're going to be looking at life. My intention was that we'll look at life and then we'll look at evolution and then we'll just wrap it up today, but I don't think that will work. So for now we're going to be looking at life. That's what we're going to be looking at. And we had said that basically all of matter is divided into two forms. There is organic matter and there is inorganic matter. Organic matter is living matter, right? Inorganic matter is non-living matter. So you have stones, you have waterfalls, you have sand, you have dust, you have wind, you have the oceans, you have everything that does not live. That's inorganic. And then you have plants, you have animals. That is living. Organic. So what we looked at last week was inorganic, right? What we're looking at this week now is organic. That's the distinction between the both of them. When people talk about evolution and about the fact that life evolved, so when people are talking about evolution, there's usually two things that you need to distinguish. You need to distinguish between microevolution and macroevolution. Microevolution is that there are certain changes that can happen to organisms at the cellular level in response to certain stimuli. Now, just for you to understand what I'm saying, every being, you know this, of course everybody knows, like a human, right? This human being, every species is made up of organs. Every organ is made up of tissues. Every tissue is made up of cells, right? And the cell is the smallest unit. That's where life happens. It's in that small unit, right? The organization of cells make tissues form, and the organization of tissues make organs form, and then organs are organized into systems, and then you have a species. But microevolution says that in response to certain stimuli, there are certain things that can happen at the cellular level. So at the most basic level, there can be changes, right? But macroevolution says that these changes don't only happen at the cellular level, but they also happen at the tissue, organ, and species level. So that a human being evolved out of a monkey or out of an ape. You get? So there were certain external stimuli that caused this being to change into another being, right? And it's based on mutation and natural selection, right? Random mutation and natural selection. Now, that is what it is. That is what macroevolution states. But like I said last week, that is not the biggest problem that faces the atheist. Proving whether evolution happened or not is not the biggest problem that faces the atheist. The biggest problem that faces the atheist is the origin of life. The fact that life exists itself is the problem. Because we only have two kinds of matter, organic and inorganic. Right? And so, the problem is, how do you move from inorganic matter to organic matter? And there's no scientific answer to this question. Till date, there's no scientific answer. There's one scientist that has been writing on the origin of life. The last piece he wrote, he said that after he has spent 35 years studying this topic, he's convinced that the problems in this topic are more than the answers. 35 years of work. Science doesn't have an answer to that question. Right? It doesn't have an answer to that question. So that's the issue. How do you move from inorganic to organic? And then there's something that scientists usually say. Meanwhile, science doesn't say anything. Scientists say stuff. And there's a difference between the both of them. When you hear someone say that science says this, and this, what is the person saying really? What is science? If you say science says this, what are you saying? What is saying it? Science is a body of knowledge. That's all that science is. A body of knowledge cannot say anything because it's a body of knowledge. It can't say anything. It is scientists that say stuff. So scientists can say stuff if they make reference to this body of knowledge. But the body of knowledge itself cannot say anything. Do you get what I'm saying? It can't say anything. So scientists say stuff, and not science. But there's something that scientists used to say. Scientists used to say that it is possible for life to have formed from inorganic life because the first life was simple life. That's how they say it. It was simple life. And this was something that was propounded by Charles Darwin when he was pushing his theory. Now, he proposed that the first life was simple life and the first life was unicellular. I'm sure you've heard of unicellular organisms. Like you are a multicellular organism, right? You are a multicellular organism to the infinite degree, right? But a unicellular organism is like the amoeba, for example. But then, when Darwin was making these statements, he didn't have access to a lot of information that we have access to now. And that's kind of part of the stuff I'm going to be showing you. The trouble with life is information. That's the trouble. And the trouble with information, I'm going to explain. The trouble with information is the fact that everywhere you have information, you assume intelligence. Everywhere you have information. If you came into this room, and then this room has been locked for 100 years, and you came into the room 100 years after it was locked, and on the board, you saw Makinde, get out. Then as the person was writing the get out, he didn't finish the UT. Then you saw a corpse somewhere there. What you're going to assume is that the person knew that you were going to come, so the person was warning you that if you enter this place, you're going to die. You get the point? Now, if you entered inside the room and you didn't see a corpse, but you saw Makinde, get out, what are you going to assume? You have two options. The first option is that something or someone wrote it. The second option is that, this place has been locked for 100 years. Chance, time, dust, nature just engraved this thing on the board. You see, no matter how scientific you are, you're not going to choose the second option. You're not going to. Let's say, CY likes long tea now. So, CY came for BC from Cameroon because he wants to see long tea and that's the only time you can see her. So, he came for BC. He even came 2 days earlier, joined the ushering unit so that he can be around, Then, he comes for the first ushering meeting. And as soon as he enters the hall, he sees Long T with another guy. They are holding hands, and then they are talking, they are laughing. It's obvious that something is going on here, right? Then he sees, maybe Long T likes this guy, maybe Long T doesn't. So he ignores it. Then as he's going, he now goes to another place, and then he sees a note on the floor. Then he takes the note and he reads it. Then in the note, you now see Long T loves Casey. On the note. Or let's say it's by the beach. That's, you people are by the beach. Imagine BC is happening by the beach. So, you people are by the beach now. Then you now see in the sand. The guy that Long T was with that time was Casey. So you now see in the sand, Long T loves Casey. Are you going to assume that that thing was a product of natural forces? You know, the waves of the wind, then the sea, then a few crabs came out from the ocean, and they just scribbled that thing into the sand. Everywhere you see information, intelligence is assumed. That's the problem with life. And I'm saying that it's a problem with life because there's no such thing as simple life. None. The problem with life is everywhere there is information, intelligence is assumed. Okay? So, there are a couple of atheists that usually say, in fact, I think I remember reading Lawrence Krauss. Lawrence Krauss is a physicist, right? So, he's atheist too. And then he was having a debate with I think John Lennox, yeah. And so John Lennox asked him, what will it take you to believe in God? And then Krauss says, if I go out now and I see in the sky, written in Hebrew, hi, Lawrence, I am here. I'm going to think about it. So, he says that his evidence, or what he will consider as evidence enough for him to think about it is, hi, I am there. So these 5 letters, these 2 letters, this 1 letter, this 1, this is what? 2. So 4, 9, 4, 8, 4, 6, 11. 11 letters. Right? So he says that if he sees 11 letters arranged in this form that tell this story, he's going to assume that God exists. Now, the trouble is that with what we call so-called simple life, there is something that is called DNA. That's the trouble. And DNA is a problem. DNA is a problem for atheists because in a unicellular organism like the amoeba, right? You know what the DNA is? So the DNA is like a double-stranded, helical structure. I know that my drawing is ugly, but just bear with it. So you have something like this, and then you have nucleic bases, right? So you have adenine, you have thymine, you have cytosine, and you have guanine, right? Long T. Sorry, but this one you have to know it. So, with DNA, you have the double strands, but then you have these nucleic acid bases. It is the arrangement of these 4 letters. So, we refer to them as A, T, C, and G. That's how they are referred to. It's the arrangement of these 4 letters that determine eventually what you're going to look like. Your life is an expression of a code. And the DNA is the code. The arrangement of these letters is actually what makes you look the way you look. If you took my DNA structure and created someone with my DNA structure, the person is going to look exactly like me. Physically. Exactly like me. Because my physical expression is, or my physical outlook is an expression of this code. Now, You have DNA in every life form. Every life form has DNA. Of course, except viruses. And people argue on whether viruses are living things or not. The virus is a living thing. The virus is not a living thing. So there's that debate that keeps going on. But every living thing, every proper living thing has DNA, right? And DNA has alphabets. So the alphabet of the English language, right? The English language, our system in English language, the vocabulary is made up of 26 alphabets, yeah? DNA just has 4. Just has 4. A, T, C, and G. Just 4. The trouble is that, you see, these 4 things, well, are combined in at least 7 billion ways. That's why we have 7 billion people on the face of the earth. So everybody has a unique DNA structure. That's why they do DNA tests to know who is your father or who is your... Now, when you do DNA tests to know who is your father, it doesn't mean that your DNA is 100% of his DNA. It doesn't mean, right? But there's usually a very close match. Sometimes 95%, sometimes 99%, but there's still a difference, you know. The amoeba, the unicellular organism, which is what Darwin used to refer to as simple life, has as much information in its DNA to fill 1,000 sets of encyclopedia. Now, you may not know, you should know the old encyclopedia, how they were. You know how it was? It was 26 volumes. So you had an encyclopedia, one volume was A, another volume was B, another volume was C. So everything worth knowing in the world that began with A would be in that. So you have 26 sets or 26 volumes in one set. And if you've seen an encyclopedia, you know how big it is. In one set, that's just one set, 26 volumes. The information in the encyclopedia, in the DNA of the amoeba, the unicellular organism, is enough to fill 1,000 sets. 1,000 sets. That's 1,000 times 26 of books, huge books. And you see, it's not just information, or it's not just letters ordered in a random manner. It is actually information that makes sense. So, there's something that is called specified complexity. That's how the senior people call it. Of course, this thing is not like I'm the one that branded it. It's just, this is what they say. There's something that is called specified complexity. And this refers to DNA. We are saying that if you took that 1,000 sets of encyclopedia and you opened it, you'll be able to read. Because this is 11 letters, right? You can read it. Now this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Alright, Lomsi, read that one that I wrote. This one. Pronounce it. You can't. Don't even try. You can't pronounce it. Why are you going to pronounce? You can't pronounce it. The reason why you cannot pronounce it is, even though there are 11 letters here and there are 11 letters here, this complexity is specified. This complexity is not specified. It's not specific complexity. So even though if I come into a cave and I see this written on the wall, I'm still going to assume intelligence. I'm still going to assume intelligence, right? But it's not at the same level as if I came into the cave and saw this written. Do you get the point? So we are saying that everywhere there is information, you assume intelligence. That one is basic. Everywhere there is information, you assume intelligence. But there's also something that is called specified complexity, whereby the information that you are seeing takes on a specific form and is legible. It's legible. I'm saying that if you if you interpreted the DNA in an amoeba, right, and you took it out and you wrote it into books, you'll be able to have 1,000 sets of encyclopedia, right, that contain legible words. Words that make sense. Sentences that make sense. That's the point. Do you get the point? And I'm saying that that's a unicellular organism. Unicellular. A unicellular organism. It's an issue that naturalists cannot get around. They can't get around. How do we have life? How do we have life according to a program? That's the trouble. Because life is according to a program. That's why there are different forms of life. Life's according to a program. Next week, I'm going to be showing us how that even if you have DNA mutations, you cannot have changing life forms. You can't. Even if you have DNA mutations. You cannot have life forms that change. Because DNA is not responsible for changing life forms. DNA alone is not responsible for changing life forms. You'll see that next week. Because there's something that is called epigenetic material, epigenetic information. Epigenetic information is as important as genetic information. So DNA is genetic information, yeah. There's epigenetic information, right? But I'm even saying that at the basic level, at the foundational level, life is programmed. What we are looking at is design plausible or not? You see, by the time you start using words like program, code, you start getting an idea that this thing is not random. Do you get the point? If someone says that, there's a way Bill Gates talks about DNA. He says that DNA is like a program that runs the human. That's how Bill Gates talks about it, right? So, he should understand what he's talking about because this guy builds computers, right? And he knows that programs don't happen on their own. Programs are built, right? Codes are built that run computers, that run phones, and run all of our devices. They are programs specific for them, you know. In the same way, the DNA looks like a program that runs the human. In fact, the DNA is actually a program that runs the human body. Not just the human body, animal bodies. The DNA looks like that program. And what I'm trying to say is that this issue of information in life is an issue that naturalists have not been able to get around. So if you ask them, how do they go around this issue? What they would usually say is, well, we don't have all the answers now, but if you give us more time, we'll be able to find a natural cause for the origin of life. Now, that's a very foolish thing to say, because you cannot find an inorganic cause for organic life. You can't. That's like saying something happened to this chair and a baby came out. The difference between a human being that is alive and a human being that is dead is the same in chemical composition. If you die now, your chemical structure will not change. If we checked the chemicals in your body when you were alive, they will largely be the same as the chemicals in your body when you die. Of course, removing the cause of death, which can do a couple of things. But they will largely be the same. So what's the difference between you and a corpse? That's the trouble. That's the trouble. How do you move from inorganic to organic? How? There's no way you combine proteins that will give birth to life. Simply because if you kept combining proteins, all you have are combined proteins. I said last week that there's even a bigger dilemma there, because the only way that proteins are produced is because of DNA, right? And then proteins are needed for DNA. So the chicken or the egg, which came first? DNA or proteins? Which came first? There is no way you answer that question without resolving to creation. The question of the chicken and the egg, which came first? If you're a student of the Bible, you know the answer to that question. It's not hard. It's not hard. It's the chicken that came first. God created, and God created, it's the chicken that came first, right? Then he now gave birth to the egg that gave birth to more chickens, you know. If you're a student of the Bible, DNA or proteins, which came first? DNA came first. Alright. So when God created Adam, did Adam have only DNA or did he have proteins? But you see, the point is that you cannot get proteins without DNA. Right? But the building blocks of DNA is proteins. Now that's another issue altogether. That's not even the issue that I'm saying that is confusing for these people. The issue that is confusing for naturalists is, how do you move from inorganic life to organic life? No matter how much time we give you, you can't find the answer. And remember what we said last week. I think it was last week we said here, 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. How that we're saying that there are certain things. Usually what science does is that science observes science observes scenarios, right? And tries to find out causes. Basically, science is a study of causes. What caused this? What will it cause? That kind of thing. That's what science does. And science does that by drawing up theories, hypotheses, right? Testing them, and then getting theories, and then all of that. But there are certain things that cannot be repeated. For example, the creation of the universe. We can't recreate that environment. People have tried to do it on a micro level. It doesn't work. We can't, there are certain things that cannot be recreated. From the time that the universe began up until now, there has been about 13.5 billion years. You can't recreate it. Right? You also cannot recreate the origin of life. It means that if you're going to use scientific methods to find out what happened there, the best you're going to be doing is you're going to be doing forensic work, which is investigative. What happened? When you're doing investigative work, it's not the same as when you can recreate it. You say, okay, let's combine hydrogen and oxygen and see what it will give us. So when we added 1 molecule of oxygen, we had water. When we added 2, we had hydrogen peroxide. You know, we can recreate it, we can test it and see. We can't test the creation of the universe. We can't test the creation of life. So if we want to find out what happened at that time, we have to work like journalists and go backwards. We have to go backwards. That's the only way to go. You know. But if you're going backwards, you have to be open to many kinds of answers. You have to be open to almost every kind of answer. If you rule out certain kinds of answers before you start that journey, you're probably not going to end up with anything. So they eventually tell us that we were doing the God of the gaps fallacy, right? Which is that anything we don't understand, we just used to put God inside. But that's not what we're doing. Because we saying that there is a designer is not an argument from silence. We're not making that argument because we have a gap that we need to fill. We're actually making that argument from knowledge that we have. So it's not like we don't know what happened here. There's this. So we don't know what happened here. So we're filling this big space with God. That's not what it is. What it is that we know that this has happened. And we are saying, from what has happened, what is the best explanation of the evidence that we now have? So if someone tries to bully you into that corner and say, you're doing God of the gaps, anything you don't know, you just put God inside. You're like, no, that's not what we're doing. We're not saying we don't know, therefore God. That's not what we're saying. We are saying we know. We know that organic life cannot come from inorganic life. And we are saying, what is the best explanation for this state of affairs? It should be that there was a designer. Someone designed organic life. Do you get how I'm looking at it? Now, you see, when we talk about the origin of life, next week is going to make a whole lot more sense. When we talk about the origin of life, that's not even all of the problems that the people that push evolution have. That's not even all of the problems. The other thing is that there's something that is called the Cambrian explosion. You see, at the Cambrian explosion, what happened is that there were different life forms, right? So life was moving on a straight line. And then at some point, the thing just began to do like this. It just began to spike. Now, what happened is, most of the fossils that we have, right, came up at this Cambrian explosion. All of a sudden, we just began to see different forms of life, different complexities of life coming up at the same time. What the evolutionist will tell you that life evolved. Now, if life evolved, we should see intermediate levels of fossils as the thing is evolving gradually. We should have those fossil records that show that gradually this thing is changing. Then it became what we see today. That's not what we see. We see nothing and then we see many forms at the same time. So, there's the problem of the origin of life, and then there's the problem of the Cambrian explosion. That's another issue that we're going to be dealing with next week. But I hope you understand this whole thing about the origin of life, because people have said different things. In fact, Richard Dawkins is one of the people that say that he believes that it is possible that life came to Earth because aliens introduced a seed, a spore that contains life. So aliens came, they threw it on Earth, and then they went back. Now, that's a good thing to say. So we now need to ask you, who created the aliens? How did the aliens become aliens? How did the aliens have life? You see, no matter how far back you go, you have to come to a first origin of life. You can't keep going and just ignore the fact that there's an origin of life. You have to come to that first point. So that's the first issue. The first issue is that life exists at all. And when we say life exists, we are saying that the simplest life has a ton of information that is coded for. The simplest life is run by a program. The simplest. We're not talking of human life and dogs and other animals. We are saying the simplest life, a unicellular organism, has a ton of information. Do you know what's 1,000 sets of encyclopedia? It means you have 26 very big books, bigger than dictionaries, times 1,000. 2,600 of those. That's the information that powers the amoeba. That information of books, if we had 2,600 of those books, maybe they will fill like half of this room. That's the information that powers the organism that you cannot see with your eye. Which is more probable, that the thing happened by accident or that the thing was designed? And so there's no answer. There's no naturalistic answer to the problem of the origin of life. And they will tell you, give us time. Give you time. Okay. But you see, that's not a very good argument. Give us time is not a very good argument. Give us time, we'll find the answer. That sounds like faith. Yeah. It sounds like what Christians call faith. Like, we already believe this thing will happen, so just calm down. Like the way people are saying that Donald Trump will win the election. They were saying, when this thing first started, it was looking like Biden will win. They say, no, there are still more states. They are still counting more states. Just give us more time. They are still counting more states. Okay, they counted the states. Whether by rigging or by not rigging, or by no electoral fraud or not, those states were given to Biden. Eventually Biden won. So now the issue is, give us time, we're going to the Supreme Court. You know that is, okay. But, Yeah, no, but the Electoral College has decided. So the Electoral College will meet in December, but that's just to formalize what has already happened. It's already formal. Every state has electoral votes, so that's not. So now they are saying we'll go to the Supreme Court and then they will challenge the thing and eventually Trump will be returned as president. Now, that sounds a lot like faith. Sounds a lot like faith. It's the same way that atheists say, if you give us time, we'll find a natural cause for life. It's like saying, if you give us time, we'll find a natural cause for the universe. It's like saying, if you give me enough time, I'll give birth to my father. That's kind of what it is. The reason why it doesn't work is not because we can't give them time. It's because logically it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make logical sense. You can't find a natural cause for nature. You can't. You can't find a natural cause for nature. It's just commonsensical. You can't find a natural cause for nature. If nature exists, it couldn't have been caused by something natural, because that thing will have to have existed for it to be caused. But for that thing to have existed, nature will have to have existed. So no matter how much time you give me, I can't give it to my dad. It's not a matter of time. It's a matter of the fact that this thing moves in an orderly sequence. It cannot work. So there's that problem. There's that problem with the origin of life. And okay, this is almost 6 o'clock. I think that's all we'll take today because of time. Because I don't want to start talking about evolution, because if I do, I'm not going to go so far and then we'll have to stop. So I've spoken about life, and the point to note, just to wrap up, the point to note about life is the fact that life has information. Life goes according to a program. Life goes according to a program, according to a code, according to a sequence of ordered alphabets. So if you saw, hi, I am there in the sky, it had 11 letters, right? And you believed that God wrote it. Why is it difficult to believe that in the organism that you're seeing, that has thousands of books that specify how that life should be, why is it hard to believe that there's intelligence there? It just doesn't make sense. If you can believe that intelligence is behind 11 letters, why will you not believe that intelligence is behind 10,000 letters? And not 10,000 random letters, 10,000 ordered letters. Why wouldn't you believe that there's intelligence there? That's the problem of the naturalist, and they don't have an answer to that. Right? So the origin of life in itself is one of the most beautiful pointers to design, because life is run according to information. And everywhere we see information, we assume what? Intelligence, So that's a good takeaway. That's a good point to stop. When we come next week, we're going to be looking at evolution. And there are many ways to see how evolution doesn't work. There are people that believe, like I said, the atheistic evolutionists, that believe that God created first life. And then he now allowed it to evolve over time. Now, that's not even a very smart way to think, because scientifically, it doesn't check out. It doesn't check out, and next week you're going to see how that whole thing doesn't even make sense. I've tried to give you some of those bits, epigenetic information and stuff, but you're going to see it. There's something I told you guys a while ago. Alright, next week we'll just pick it up from there. So are there any questions while we wrap up? So life, the fact that life exists, and the fact that every life, the most simple life has a ton of information that guides it is proof of intelligence. And if there's intelligence, then there's someone that was intelligent there. Intelligence is proof of a mind, right? That's exactly why we can talk about stuff like artificial intelligence, right? It's proof of a mind. So, no questions here. Alright. So wrap it up here, and then next week we'll continue from this point. So I hope you learned something.